English presentation. Emil Justersen, First U. The Raven is a poem written by Edgar Allan Poe, published in 1845. The poem is a psychological thriller. This analysis contains a short resume, poetic terms, rhythm and meter, similarities to Edgar's real life, and a conclusion. Resume. The Raven is a story about a man grieving over the loss of a girl called Lenore. This loss is tearing at the speaker's heart, making him desperately wanting to forget about his sorrow. At night, while sitting alone in his chamber, reading books to forget about Lenore, he hears different sounds coming from outside the chamber. While investigating the sounds, a raven appears in his chamber. The raven speaks, however, the raven can only speak one word, that word being nevermore. Reminded of his sorrow from Lenore, the speaker asks the raven, "Will I ever be happy?" To which the raven says, "Nevermore." Edgar uses alliteration. For example, in the first line, "Once upon a midnight dairy, while I wandered, weak and weary." Repeating the W sound in 3 words creates a rhythm in the poem and makes the reading more fluent. In the very same line, Edgar uses midnight, weak, and weary to create a connotation, shaping a picture of uneasiness, like setting the stage before a play. Edgar uses metaphors and imagery to create a portrait of the stories he's trying to tell. In stanza 14, Edgar writes, "Then methought the air grew denser, perfumed from an unseen censer, swung by seraphim whose footfalls tinkled on the top floor." Here he describes angels flying around the censers, instead of just saying fog. That makes for a much more interesting stanza, and really gets the readers going. Throughout the whole poem, Edgar emphasizes on the melancholic bow sounds to create a feeling of nothingness and despair. We have an example of this in stanza 12. "Straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of bird, bust, and door. Then upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to Lincoln, fancy unto fancy thinking, that this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking, nevermore." As said before, this creates an atmosphere of darkness and disdain. Another metaphor can be seen in stanza 13. "This I sat engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing, to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core." Here we can see a bird staring at the speaker, but instead of just saying that he's staring at the speaker, the bird is now using his fiery eyes to burn straight into the speaker's stomach. In stanza 12, we see just how large the vocabulary of this poem is, and how much time and thought has gone into the making of this poem. "Fancy unto fancy, thinking, what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking, nevermore." He uses 4 different words containing G, which describes basically the same feature about this bird: grim, ungainly, ghastly, and gaunt. This creates yet another alliteration with the connotation of dread and horror. The meter of the poem is trochaic octameter, with some exceptions, with H stressed, unstressed, 2-syllable feet per line. For example, in the first sentence, "Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary." You can clearly tell the 2 syllables in weary to be first stressed where and then unstressed we, to make a 2-syllable foot. I believe that the reason Edgar uses a trochaic meter is because that the trochaic meter is often looked at has a more serious meter, and for instance the iamb, which is used more on jolly time. The rhyme scheme in The Raven is A, B, C, D, B, B. And it's an end rhyme scheme, which means that it's only the last word which rhymes. For example, I've taken the last word of each line in the first stanza. Weary, lore, tapping, door, and more, which fits perfectly with the A, B, C, D, B, B rhyme scheme. Edgar had a cousin named Virginia Elsa Clem, who he married when she was 13 and he was 27. The nature of the marriage is said to be like that of a brother and a sister, which is almost transparent in the poem. Lenore is described as a radiant maiden whom the angels named Lenore, which is a description of a loved one and not necessarily a lover. There's also a lack of perverseness in this poem in regards to some of his other texts. For example, The Black Cat and The Telltale Heart, where the main character can't hold back his urges, where with Lenore, everything is sacred. Sadly, Virginia, just like Lenore, died. Virginia died of tuberculosis at the age of 24. She was sick for about 5 years before dying, which is why the line, "Is there balm in Gilead?" may be referring to her long period of sickness, where she was just getting worse and worse. To conclude, Edgar is a brilliant writer. He uses a large vocabulary and is excellent at setting the tone for a serious, scary thriller. Through his metaphors and imagery, Poe creates a world for his poems, where the atmosphere is just questionable enough while still seeming truthful. He creates these dark but not unbelievable stories. Furthermore, I think it's fair to say that Poe's real life and his wife may be the inspiration for this poem.